thank you so much for joining us here this evening, Kathryn, and I'll let you get started.
Okay, thanks very much, Hannah, for the introduction. And so my name is Kathryn Bristow, or I go by Kat for short. My pronouns are they, her, she, her, or they, them. You can use any of those. I'm absolutely fine with. Anyway, it's really nice. Hello to everyone in Cambridge. It's really nice to be here. I haven't been to Cambridge before myself, but I hope to visit more places once lockdown and everything's over and we're a bit back to normal. But it's really nice to be here with you all virtually. So I will get right into it. So the first thing I want to say is being an ally to trans people is you do not need to know everything up front. Yeah, you don't need to be able to use all the right terms straight away. All you need to do is trust that trans people know who we are, keep an open mind when we talk about our experiences, and offer the same basic respect that you would do with anyone else. So first of all, I want to break a notion of what trans actually means. So the dictionary definition of trans means that transgender means the gender you are isn't the same as your sex assigned at birth, which is kind of a nebulous explanation because there isn't really a right way to be trans. There's lots of different experiences with trans people, and I don't want to say that I represent all trans experiences because there is no one that represents all trans experiences. So like with any group, you need to listen to multiple people because we're quite a diverse group. So also in Latin, trans means the opposite side of, with the inverse of that being cis means the same side of. So when we say someone's cisgender, that means their sex assigned at birth matches to their gender. So it's basically just a way of saying that someone isn't trans. So on my personal journey, I have always known that my gender doesn't match my sex assigned at birth. Maybe not always consciously, but I've always noticed that and always struggled through all my life being able to accept who I am. So to get into your head what trans actually means, I want you to imagine yourself at 13, just starting puberty. All these changes are happening to your body, which is fine if you're not trans or people go through puberty. But if you're a man, if you're a cis man, so a non-trans man, imagine that you, instead of all of the changes that you got, you grew breasts and started to menstruate as well. And for women, you grew a beard and developed a voice that sounds like Chris Hemsworth. So that kind of, we don't like, it's not that we believe that we're born into the wrong body. It's just that the changes that we go through don't match what our gender is and what we know ourselves to be. So this is what we call gender dysphoria. So this kind of mismatch between how we identify and our physical experience. So like from that, one of my strongest memories from when I was 15 is having to shave for the first time. And I just had tears rolling down my face because it felt like I was becoming the man that I didn't want to be. It's not, so like when I was young, I always wanted to be Peter Pan because that means that I would never grow up and these changes would never happen to me. So when we talk about, I'll go on to healthcare later, but when we talk about trans teenagers growing up and being allowed puberty blockers, this is what we're talking about. It's like this, these changes not happening to them. It's a really important thing to be able to choose for yourself what would be right for you in that kind of situation. Now, what I have explained is very binary. Not every trans person has dysphoria, and it's just a major part of my own experience of being trans. So going a bit into detail, my gender is a bit fluid, which means I don't have dysphoria day to day, or rather how I feel about it changes. Essentially, I have two genders, female and agender. Agender means not to have a gender. And one of those two genders are prominent at any one time. So essentially, I am non-binary, which is both a gender identity and an umbrella term in itself, because gender is a social construct. We use these terms to best describe for who we know, who we are, and how we feel about our gender and how we associate with the world. If you want to know someone's gender, the only real way you can tell is ask them. But some of the pitfalls, you don't ask if they're a boy or girl, because that answer is loaded. It says that you have to be one of the two, when there's more options than that. So the answers may be yes, neither, either, or other. The other thing is, if you ask someone their gender or any of the experiences, they don't have to tell you. Like, you can have a conversation about it, you can ask, and that's fine. But if they don't want to tell you, that's fine. You just leave it alone. So going on about asking, pronouns are the best way to know someone's pronouns is ask. It's in the same way you would do with someone's title. So for my example, my title is Ms. If you call me Miss or Mrs., I get quite annoyed by that. And I think quite a few women in the audience can also understand that kind of, when someone uses the wrong title for you, how annoying that can be. So pronouns essentially like that. Where have I got to? So the best way, if you want to know someone's pronouns, is the best way to ask is to say your pronouns and ask what theirs is. So I could say, I'm Kathryn, my pronouns are they, their, what's your pronouns? That is normally the best way to ask someone. And if you get someone's pronouns wrong, that's okay. Even trans people get pronouns wrong. Even with people we've known for years, it happens. But the best thing to do is to apologize quickly, say this thing that you've just said again with the correct pronouns, and then just try to make sure that you use correct pronouns afterwards. So now I'm going to talk about the Gender Recognition Act, or the GRA. So this is just a process to change the sex stated on your birth certificate to match your gender. It doesn't make a difference in the majority of people's lives. It can just have a few implications with things like legal documents for trans people, as why it can be important. and also not being able to having out yourself as trans at every point where you need your birth certificate, or just being able to be recognised in every aspect of society is also quite nice. The reason we want the current process to be reformed is it's quite an arduous process, it's quite medicalised, it's quite dehumanising. So I'll just go through a few issues with the current process. First of all, you have to have a diagnosis for gender dysphoria, which, as I've stated before, not all trans people have dysphoria. It also bars intersex people from legally changing their gender unless they also have gender dysphoria. You also need to be living as your gender for 2 years. What this exactly means isn't clear, especially for non-binary and gender non-conforming trans people. So in all, the process is very bureaucratic, where a remote panel of doctors and judges decide if you've done enough to deserve to have your gender recognised, where there isn't even a process for appeals. So it's very important that we have change in that process. So all the government is offering right now is to make the process cheaper, from £140 to a nominal fee, whatever that means, which is just applying. It doesn't negate all extra paperwork you need to put your application forwards. They're also moving it online, which doesn't really make it less bureaucratic, it just involves less physical paperwork. So NES clearly doesn't go far enough to ensure that trans people are treated with dignity through this process. So even the British Medical Association says trans people should just be able to make a declaration to change their gender. The opposition to trans and non-binary people being allowed to self-declare their gender isn't based on any kind of fact at all. It's already in place in countries. It's always in place in countries such as Ireland, Iceland, Argentina, Norway, Belgium, Portugal, and Malta. And there's no evidence of harm to non-trans women because of these laws that have been put in place. So the pros of the motion to the British Medical Association said this. I'll just read out a brief quote. As doctors, it's really important that we take a stand. The government should not be picking and choosing what healthcare is appropriate. We end up as gatekeepers, not only for healthcare, but for what is male and female. It doesn't feel like a role doctors should be doing. It doesn't feel like something anyone should be doing for anyone else. So, which brings us into healthcare, was my next point from the GIA. So on healthcare in the UK, trans healthcare is in total crisis. At the beginning of the year, so this is before COVID and everything else that's happened this year, 13,000 and a half trans people were waiting for their first appointment for gender identity clinic. So that's no treatment. That's how many people are on the waiting list at the beginning of this year. So who knows how many more with COVID, the process being stopped, is on that list now. So the waiting times are over 4 years long, and that wait is growing all the time. And as I said, that is just waiting for first appointment. In that first appointment, you don't get prescribed hormones, you don't get referred to surgery, it's basically just an assessment. So you have to wait another year for a second appointment for them to even consider prescribing hormones, and at least another 3 years for any kind of surgery. So this idea that anyone is rushed through in this process is quite insulting, to be honest. So that is all treatment that's specific to trans people, but it doesn't get much better when we come to general healthcare that isn't related to being trans. I've known so many people that have been turned away from their GPs for common issues like eating disorders, migraines, back pain, or any other kind of common ailments that people might have. And the response that I hear most of is that they don't deal with trans issues, which basically means that they don't deal with trans people. So I know I've left my GP in tears because a simple request can just lead on a conversation about them questioning my transition time and time again, when I just want to be treated like any other of their patients. There's also problems when it comes to health checks and screenings. So a trans person undergoing feminizing treatment still needs to have their prostate checked and have screening for breast cancer. So when so I need to take on that responsibility to remind my GP that those things need to be done. And obviously people going under masculizing treatment still needs to go to a gynecologist, which can be very difficult. And I've known some trans men being flat out refused to be seen by the doctors. Like they've booked an appointment, they've gotten there, and the doctors just refuse to see them. Illness unsurprisingly leads to poor health and mental health outcomes for trans people, which is worsened by the fact that trans people face disproportionate levels of violence, social exclusion, and poverty. I'm not saying all of this to you to feel sorry for trans people. That's not what we need our allies to be. We want you to speak up against these injustices, push for a world where trans people don't have to fight for the right to enjoy life as any other person does day to day. To say that it isn't right when people call us slurs or misgender us or dismiss our human rights. All that trans people want is to live as ourselves. We don't want any special treatment. We just want to be included in society. I hope this all was quite clear for you. I believe now there's some question if I have that right.
Great, thank you so much for your talk, Kathryn. I think there'll be lots of questions that are coming through. Do you mind if I just ask with a really simple one, which would just be, could you talk us through the flag that's behind you and what it represents, if anything, and what the different colours represent?
So the one on my left.
Oh, yeah, I can't see. It's two flags from where I am, actually.
Yeah, so this one here is a trans flag. So it means, so the blue on the outside represents masculine genders. The pink represents feminine genders, and the white represents non-binary genders.
And does it then go pink, blue again?
Yeah, or so it goes blue, pink, white, pink, blue.
Yeah, and then there's another flag behind you as well.
So that's the Pansexual Flag.
So
the colours are magenta, yellow, and cyan. Yeah, which are the printer colours, and it's because so pangender means that you're pansexual means that you're attracted to any gender. So it's the printer colours because they mix together to form any colour.
Great. Thank you, that was really interesting. And I thought it was just a single flag, so I've definitely learned something. So I will now hand over to Peter, who will be picking up questions at the chat and discussing them. And if anybody's asked a question, wants to ask a follow-up question, then please do add it to the chat, and then Peter will pick it up and ask it.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I will be checking the chat, so don't worry about that. Right, Kathryn. So if someone has a teenage relative or friend who's struggling with their gender identity, how can we, as cis people or as even trans friends and family, support them effectively?
So first of all, just listen to them. Trust what they have to say about themselves is true. And then also getting into more technical details, the charity Mermaid is a great organisation which offers peer support and a lot of different things for families and trans children to explore their gender and make the right decisions for themselves.
Okay, thank you. So how do you feel about people trying other pronouns? Do you think people should think really carefully beforehand, or should they just come and see how they suit them?
I guess it doesn't really, I guess it's not really a one-size-fits-all solution. Whatever's best for you. If you feel like a different set of pronouns would suit you better, ask for your friends to call you by those pronouns just to see how it feels. And if that feels right to you, then you can start using them. Otherwise, you can just choose one day to use different pronouns. It's as I said, there's no one right answer to that.
Next question. Would the world be better with no definitions of gender or gender roles / stereotype, where everyone can express themselves however they like without being linked to a certain gender? Or can gender roles actually be beneficial in certain contexts?
So obviously we don't live in a genderless world. It's well, even if a genderless world is possible, is debatable. But yeah, yes, if there was no gender, that would probably benefit a lot of people. But you would still, obviously, I would still have dysphoria. So those things don't go away overnight. But all the discrimination that comes from gender roles and everything like that wouldn't be a thing. So it would be beneficial from that stance. But as I said, if a genderless world is even possible is up to debate, because we fundamentally interact with each other on gender.
Thank you. Do you know people who are unable to have their gender recognized due to costs involved, either monetary or like from a mental health perspective?
Yes, so I know quite a few trans people. Sorry. Yes, sorry, someone stuck in my throat. So yes, I know. Sorry. Sorry about that. So yes, I know trans people who can't be themselves for whatever reason. Normally the reason is family not supporting them, or they don't feel like they can be supported by their family. And with costs, so with medical and transition, also because the wait for NHS is so long, a lot of the only options for a lot of trans people is private care. But even then, the waits can be over 6 months to even see someone to start that process. So even then, that can be a costly process. So a lot of trans people can't afford it, so they're just stuck in this what seems like an endless wait to be seen by the NHS, which is an awful feeling. It feels like your life is completely on hold until you can kind of be able to be yourself, just have those experiences where you're not defined by something you're just not.
You mentioned healthcare in the NHS again, so I'll ask this question. So you said that the waiting list for the first appointment can take up to 3 years, I think.
It can be over 4 years at the moment.
Over 4 years?
Yes.
So what's the typical wait time a trans person might face for each step of the kind of trans-specific healthcare that they need?
So 4+ years for first appointment, 1 year after that for second appointment to be considered to start hormones. You can start hormones in that appointment, or you can wait another year or so for another appointment for them to give you the okay ahead. And then typically you need to be on hormones for at least 2 years to be considered for any kind of surgery. And then once that wait is over, then you can be referred, and then that can take another few years to be able to get any surgery. So it is a very long process, and the narrative that people are being rushed into this process is absurd, because there is so much waiting for you to go through to be able to get basic care.
Someone's just asked, may I ask what the they pronoun is?
It's they, their self. It's just a neopronoun. So it's just a pronoun that is separate from, that is outside of he, she, they. I just like the pronouns. There's no particular reason I chose them. For me, they kind of sound feminine and non-binary at the same time, is why I tend to use them. But they're derived from folklore, but the reason I use them is just because I like them.
Which is completely fair enough. Do you have experiences of other countries or other languages where gender is a lot more like integral? So like French, Spanish, and like how would trans people kind of deal with a language that doesn't even have a gender neutral pronoun such as they, them?
And that isn't something I've really looked into so much, but it is something that I've been interested to see what trans people's experiences are like in those countries. But it's something I would need to look into more. On the flip side, there are countries where there are pronouns which are just gender neutral. So for people there, being non-binary is a little bit easier in that kind of sense. There's also cultures around the world where non-binary or trans people are part of the culture. So if you look at in America with Native Americans, you have two-spirit people. In And then you also have people in India and Australia, in Aboriginal Australian people, all have genders outside the binary. So the idea of a gender binary is a very Western European centric idea.
So how is the UK compared to other European countries with respect to trans rights? Are there other countries that you think have a better approach to trans people?
I wouldn't say there's one country that has the ideal approach to trans people. Every country has its problems with trans rights, and there's no country which I feel that trans people are just truly accepted and able to access all the services they need. I think one of the ways that the UK particularly stands out is this idea of trying to make trans rights a debate, where trans people are harmful to cis women, where we're not. There's no evidence that trans women are any more there's no risk of trans women harming women any more than cis women harm other women. So I think that's the thing that sets the UK apart from other countries. Even in the US, you have Biden and Kamala Harris talking about trans rights, and that kind of recognition from a leader is kind of unthinkable at this current time in the UK. So the UK is very behind in kind of culturally accepting trans people. So I think that's one of the biggest hurdles to overcome for trans rights in the UK.
So I've just had a clarification in the chat, actually. So in some European languages, we have got a slowly emerging kind of combination of pronouns to kind of have a gender neutral option. So like il in French being il and elle, and ella being elle and ella in Spanish. So thank you for that. Next question. Similarly to bi and pan people, and now specifically asexual and aromantic people within the kind of sexuality spectrum, are there gender identities that are kind of less heard from, whether they're gender binary, non-binary, sorry, gender fluid, agender, or do you think that the kind of trans umbrella is a lot better at amplifying everyone's voices compared to the sexuality spectrum?
So even within the trans community, I think there is kind of an element to that, but it's not so much each individual identity. It's basically binary trans people and non-binary trans people. So I think binary trans people have certain privileges over other trans people. They can be seen as like for example, healthcare. It's easier to get treatment if you're a binary trans person than a non-binary trans person. So even the word binary trans person makes no sense in my head. Yeah, so there is kind of, there are a lot of, so I wouldn't say there's one particular group of non-binary people that are more disadvantaged than others. Maybe gender fluid people are kind of most misunderstood in the community, but there isn't a clear there isn't one group that's clearly less disadvantaged over the others, like there is for asexual people or intersex people in like the LGBTIQA plus umbrella.
So to go from that, how can we develop a culture of acceptance here in the UK?
So I guess the first place it starts with is yourself. So if you hear someone talking about trans people in a derogatory sense, call them out for it. Just be like, that's not okay to do. It starts with each individual person just being like, it isn't right to call trans people slurs or whatever. It's trans people deserve the same rights as everyone else. And if you see someone that is not, that doesn't, that goes against that, call them out for it and just be like, no, that's not okay. It's not okay to act that way. And I think that's the way that will start to get a kind of change to our culture where when we call something unacceptable, it is unacceptable.
I think that's actually quite similar to things that were happening to gay and bi people 20 years ago, and how that slowly shifted to become more unacceptable to use slurs or outright discrimination in certain contexts. And it's kind of developed a more accepting society by having straight allies call out those who were discriminatory. So I think in the same way, we need to do the same for our trans siblings. So next question. Other than the obvious, in terms of how far we've got in, with trans rights, within the last kind of 20 years, we've seen this massive movement that is a pro-LGBTIQA plus movement, but it seems to be very focused on the LG and maybe even B. How can we help the TIQA plus and bring them into the movement and amplify their voices?
So, yeah, so I guess a lot of the work also needs to be done on this within the LGBTIQA plus community. I've seen several different parts of the community say that certain people aren't part of it because of these reasons, whether that's trans people, non-binary people, or even other sexualities like asexual or aromantic. So there needs to be that acceptance within the community as well. But when you think of the community, but whenever everyone else thinks about the community, they shouldn't just think gay, lesbian people, maybe bi people. It's a whole spectrum of different people and experiences, and the community means everyone. We're trying to just be accepted in the world like any straight cis person would. So it will be a slow change, but I think with progress and just being able to make our voices heard. I think that's one of the most important, is to let trans people speak for themselves, let intersex people speak for themselves, let asexual people speak for themselves. We all need voices. So if you are platforming LGBTIQA plus people, it needs to be people across the community, not just one sector that is found more acceptable than the others in society.
Okay, thank you. Next question. So, do trans people face specific problems with employment compared to, because I know there was a study recently that said that LGBT people were less likely to be successful in applying for a job compared to their cis-het counterparts. But do trans people face specific problems that LGBT plus people don't?
I would say yes. So if we go to, so obviously, I've already talked about healthcare and how that is a big disadvantage, especially around mental health. So kind of those kind of things puts up barriers for trans people to be able to enter and keep employment, because even though companies aren't supposed to discriminate at all, we know that if you have a mental health issue, you're less likely to get employment. So there is that kind of thing on as well. And even though we're protected under law, under the Equalities Act, we still know that when it comes to employment processes, that people would rather not hire a trans person over a cis person, which I think it's a loss to most companies for not hiring trans people. The most passionate and dedicated people I know are trans people. We will fight for anything. If you get us on your side, then we not only are you being an ally to trans people, but we can be a great asset to anyone.
So, a question about the GRA. Obviously, one of the concerns that the so-called gender critical crowd is about access to women's spaces. So Intersex, being the biggest intersex organization in the country, was actually supportive of the changes to the GRA because they claim that it affects them. But the gender critical crowd will always ask us not to include intersex people in the conversation because they're not the same thing. So how would you respond to that?
So first of all, yes, trans people and intersex people are not the same. We shouldn't be lumping us all in together into one thing, but some of our fights are jointly beneficial, so we should be pushing for things together. So for instance, with the GRA, at the moment there's no legally way for intersex people to have their gender legally recognised. So as an intersex ally, I am going to shout about that all day long. I'm not using it to further my own goals. I honestly want intersex people to have the same rights as everyone else. So, we need to fight, trans people need to fight for intersex people, and that doesn't mean including intersex people in trans fights. It means when there's an issue that all affects both of us. We push for that together. When it's one of us, we individually fight for that. So it's about allyship for both sides, and the idea that we shouldn't talk about one group, something that benefits one group, when it also benefits another, is kind of, it doesn't make any logical sense.
Sorry, I just had a question asking to clarify what the gender critical crowd is. So that's basically, in feminism, it would be the trans exclusionary feminists, and in kind of wider context, it's just people who are critical of gender identity as a concept, or how do I say this politely, are just outright transphobic. So the next question is your views on teaching children about gender. So someone was saying their 3-year-old, who is biologically female, is fascinated by the differences between boys and girls. They've always tried to teach her that your gender is about how you feel on the inside and not to make assumptions about other people. But she sees gender stereotypes around her every day and has really picked up on them. For example, insisting that pink is a girl's color and not for boys. Are there any thoughts on how you would counter this?
Well, I guess kind of kids are going to be interested in what they want to. I know some non-binary, like I know some, so I like some cis people that were basically raised non-binary, and they identify as their gender assigned at birth. It's not, it's like, so like their parents bought them like both sets of toys, any clothes. So it isn't, so I think kids will explore gender and will explore what feels right for them. And I don't think we should be in a position where we deny children that kind of exploration of gender and their own gender. It's all about figuring out what feels right for you. I guess with the association for like pink as a girl's colour, that is kind of encoded into us by society, and it's very hard to get rid of that. And whether we should be trying to stopping children having those connections is a very difficult thing, because humans will automatically make those kind of net connections between things. I guess it's kind of just explaining that pink doesn't have to be a girl's colour, blue doesn't have to be a boy's colour. These things aren't necessarily gendered. If that's your association in your head, that's fine, but it doesn't need to be in that way, I guess, is the message to get across.
Right, and then I think one more. In education, specifically in biology, physiology seems to be very gendered in whether from school all the way to university. How would you kind of go about teaching anatomy without being so kind of constricted by gender? Like if you were to prefix the year by addressing that that doesn't always apply, how would you do that?
So I think it's fine to say, obviously, women tend to have one anatomy, men tend to have another anatomy. I think the harm comes into where we set hard limits on what is a man and what is a woman, because it doesn't only exclude trans people, it excludes a lot of cis people as well. So kind of when with anatomy, it's better to break things down. So I'll go back to healthcare. So for instance, certain drugs only work better on men or with women. But what does that mean for trans people? Does it work better because of someone's hormones, or does it work because of someone's chromosomes, or a whole different range of different physiological traits? And lumping them into one doesn't help trans people or non-binary people or intersex people from making those kind of informed decisions about their healthcare, because we don't know why these things work in better for one sex than the other. So I guess when we're talking about reproductive functions, you talk about each separately, and there's also intersex people, so there's a whole range of different things. We can say that one is typically male, one's typically female, but that kind of sex but obviously sex is a social construct as well. So we decided these traits mean you're a man, these traits mean you're a woman, and it isn't particularly helpful for anyone to kind of think along those lines. So I guess with anatomy, the best thing to do is try to take the gender out of it and just explore each individual reason why something works a certain way, rather than trying to put it into one of two boxes.
Actually, one last point, because a couple of people have raised it, about the pink is for girls and blue is for boys question earlier. They've noticed that the trans flag, ironically, actually has that concept. So, do you know what the history is behind that, or how would you respond to that point?
Yeah, I mean, we do live in a world where we have that association. Trans people can both use that association and think it's nonsense at the same time. It's not a mutually exclusive idea. I'm not that certain about the history of where the trans flag comes from. I just know what the colours represent.
In the same way that the bisexual flag is pink and blue with a thin purple line in the middle, pink actually representing homosexuality and blue heterosexuality, which again, it's ascribing colours to like a stereotype, and it's also implying that bisexual is a mixture of the two when actually it's a separate sexuality by itself. So I think it was a nice design when they thought of it at the time, but it's a bit ironic in that sense. Okay, thank you. So that's all the questions. I'll just hand over to Hannah, who will wrap things up.